The number one thing I learned early on within my entrepreneurial career was that I was going to always be the biggest bottleneck of my business. Whether it was my snow removal business when I was 16, whether it was the restoration company afterwards, or now, this venture-backed software company. I realized very quickly, if I'm not able to grow and scale myself, the business is going to suffer. Early on, I've always implemented following different leaders and different people that are way more successful than I am, meeting a bunch of coaches and signing up for a bunch of masterminds, reading a lot of books, and ultimately every single day I'm very focused on shifting my mindset and just shifting the way I view things. In this video, I want to talk about the top 5 mindset shifts that I've personally gone through that I want to share with you guys, and hopefully it'll help you guys grow and scale your businesses. So the first one's actually mission, vision, and core values and the importance of this. And I actually didn't learn this until we were doing a couple $1 million of revenue and had about 10 to 15 employees. And that was actually at my home service company in the restoration industry. And I had the honor and the privilege to actually grow and scale that with my dad. And I remember we went to this business planning retreat hosted by one of our consultants, and we sat down. It was the first time we have actually done a business plan. And there was a 2-hour-long session on mission, vision, and core value. And we both sat and looked at each other, and the whole prompt was like, why are you doing this? I remember for the entire day and the following day, it was almost like my dad and I were like staring at each other blankly. Like it was this high level mission of the company. Like, why does the company exist? And what's the vision of the company? We were just there, motivated entrepreneurs out there to hustle. We really didn't know exactly, okay, well, what's this big vision? Where are we going towards? Little did we know that not having that mission, vision, and core values affected us greatly. And until we had solved that, we couldn't grow and scale our business to the next level. The way we kind of went through the framework, I have actually a link below, a video in Albi After Hours in which I talk about how we came up with our mission. But realistically, the mission is the reason of sole existence. Why do you exist as an individual? Why in the world are you doing this? And it can't be tied to money. It can't be tied to the service that you're necessarily providing to your customers. It needs to be something broad. It needs to be something bigger than yourself. The second thing is, like we said, the vision. And that vision, you need to have a very clear path and a very clear vision for what does 5 years down the road look like? What does 10 years down the road look like? What does 1 year, and so on and so forth. And then those core values are super important. At Romextera, we came up with honesty, transparency, and doing the right thing. Every single person that we hired within our organization and associate ourselves with needed to fit those core values. If they didn't fit those core values, those were so important within my dad and I's DNA, in which we just couldn't afford and we just couldn't work with somebody that didn't fit those specific core values. I really strongly recommend anybody that's on any sort of entrepreneurial journey to figure out, why in the world am I doing this? Where am I going? And what are those values, those non-negotiables that I can't give up on? Am I willing to trade honesty for money? And the answer probably is no. Like in my case, I'm not willing to run a business that makes a lot of money that I'm lying, cheating, or am dishonest with people. Am I willing to not do the right thing for money? And the answer was no, we're not willing to do so. So those core values were super, super important. Number 2 is the concept of self-limiting beliefs and how they exist within the world. So I can give you numerous examples of the self-limiting beliefs that were imposed on me by both myself and external factors, from, hey, you have to go to college to be successful, to, hey, the business that you want to build isn't meaningful enough, it isn't big enough, it's never going to go anywhere, so on and so forth. And the story I'll tell here is actually the story of how Albi set out to fundraise. And actually I had spoken with 200 plus VCs, and VCs are venture capital firms, and I had pitched them on the idea of Albi. And Albi was this job management system that was going to revolutionize the fire and water restoration industry where I had started from. And I was pitching everybody of, hey, all the technology out here is clunky, there's no other venture-backed solution here. And the VCs were coming back to me and like, the industry's not sexy enough, it's not large enough, there's no way you're going to convince contractors to consume technology, it's not the next big thing, and so on and so forth. And we had 200 plus no's over and over and over and over again. And had I just taken those no's, that was a pretty big sample size, I could have said, hey, these guys are right, they're smart, they're Harvard-backed individuals, they are way smarter than me, they have a ton more money than me, and they're telling me, hey, you can't do this, so don't go do this. But I chose not to. And I chose to keep knocking on doors, and eventually we actually got into the bee's knees of venture capitalists, and that was Y Combinator. And Y Combinator is this incubator. It's kind of like the Harvard of venture capital. And our pitch worked with Y Combinator. We had to do some work on the business and things like those. And then afterwards, we actually ended up raising about $10 million worth of capital. So had I not shifted my mindset in understanding that self-limiting beliefs exist, I wouldn't have been able to overcome this. And there's a million other stories I could tell you about that. The third mindset shift that I had was the fact that time is the most valuable asset that you have. Oftentimes we think of assets like physical things, like money, bank account balances, things like those. But I realized like all of that, there's a ton of out in the world. But if there's one thing that's scarce, it's actually your individual time. And I can prove that by just going to your calendar and proving to you that there's only 24 hours in that day, out of which you probably have to sleep 8 of them, right? And there's only a finite amount of time available every single day, every single hour, every single week. And I remember early on when I was in the hustler mode, trying to get shit done, I really never valued where my time was being put in and how intentional I was about my time. I was just going out, putting fires out, doing things that brought instant joy, doing things that brought instant cash or instant value and benefit. And it wasn't until, well, a couple of things. I guess the first epiphany I had was when I double booked my time management class. So I had actually wanted to go and figure out how to manage my time better, and I scheduled a time management class, and I actually double booked that with an appointment with a customer, and obviously the appointment with the customer was more important. I wasn't going to cancel it, so I didn't show up to my time management class to go and meet with my customer. And when I realized that, I was like, oh man, like I gotta do something. I gotta figure something out. So the first thing I did at that point was I hired an overseas offshore VA, virtual assistant, and I gave that assistant access to my calendar, made her in charge of my scheduling, and was intentional about things. Now fast forward, one of my mentors, Dan Martell, he wrote a book called Buy Back Your Time. The link's actually below. And he had all these amazing frameworks that I actually was able to supercharge my assistant on, including the perfect week, the perfect month, the preloaded year, and things like those. Basically, the concept is you've only got so much time. And all of your time should be focused on things that light you up and bring value in the world. And you shouldn't be doing anything else that doesn't do those two things. And that was a huge mindset shift compared to, we're always taught as kids, like you're supposed to eat your green beans. You're always taught like, hey, you're supposed to make your bed. You're supposed to do things that don't light you up and don't bring value either. It's just part of life. So the fourth mindset shift that I had was going from what I would call scarcity mindset to abundance mindset. And I think that due to the fact that I grew up in an Eastern European family, perhaps that scarcity mindset was built up within me. As some of you may know, most of Eastern Europe within the late 90s was actually under, late 1900s was actually under communist rule. And people would literally have to sit in line for oranges or flour or bread and things like those. So clearly things were very scarce, and obviously throughout the culture and the upbringing, you're brought up with a scarcity mindset. And the principle of scarcity mindset is there's only so much of X. There's only so much money in the world. There's only so much, flour in the world. There's only so much time. And I am going to become this hoarder, and wealth means accumulating all these things that are scarce. And what I realized was that the more that I did, the more that I had, the more that I wanted. And I ended up being into this like infinite loop. And what I mean by that is, I'll take a quick example of cash flow issues. Ever since the inception of my first larger business, Romextera, the restoration company, we constantly had the battle of cash flow. We always had the issue where the bigger we got, we would always have issues of cash being saved or struggling to make payroll. When we started Albiware, we had the same thing. No matter how big we had, we were always thinking about the next financial round. We were always thinking about how we fund and things like those, and we always had those cash flow issues. And every single time when we got to a point where we felt like, oh my God, it was almost the end of the world, the doors closed, there was no more capital, something happened. A big client came on, maybe there was a loan that opened up, maybe there was a venture capitalist that came up, or a great collection week, and so on and so forth. And what I realized and what that taught me is, well, one, you're always better off than you were before, but you're always going to have ups and downs in any sort of business. And number two is the amount of capital out there in the world, the amount of happiness out there in the world, the amount of skill, the amount of knowledge, the amount of everything is plentiful. It's abundant. So you should never really focus on the short term and freak out over it running out, because it probably won't ever run out. And if you focus on the right things, it'll come there, as opposed to focusing on hoarding things and not risking letting go of certain things just so that way you're safe, because you probably won't ever be safe. And then the fifth mindset shift that I had was health is wealth. I think a lot of young entrepreneurs, they don't really focus on their health, right? A lot of times you're out there, quote unquote, getting shit done. You're hustling, you're working on building yourself up financially and probably burning the midnight oil and eating McDonald's. And that's all fine and dandy until you come to some sort of realization that, hey, if I'm not healthy, if my brain isn't working the proper way that it should be, it could actually impact all aspects of our lives. And I didn't have that epiphany until a life-changing moment, and that was in 2021, December, where I was at an all-time high. Albi was past the venture capital stage. I remember I was teaching a class, it was a sales boot camp, and my wife calls me up and says that, hey, I just tested positive for COVID. Long story short, I go back home, tried to quarantine and things like those. I ended up actually getting COVID, ended up being in the hospital for about 4 months. It was not super great. Ended up getting blood clots. It was a long recovery journey, and it really showed me that, hey, you know, no matter how much capital you have or how much success you have or how much love you have and things like those, if you're plopped out of your life and put into what I would call the jail cell of a hospital, there's really no point to it. And that's when I went on this health journey. And the first self-limiting belief that I had was, oh, I'm gonna have to take time away from work and actually put it into my health journey, and time away from my family and put it into my health journey. But what I actually realized was the amount of time and effort that I put into my health journey actually supercharged my business journey and a bunch of other aspects of my life. And it was super cool. That is the fifth mindset shift that I personally went through in my entrepreneurial career. So I hope you guys had something that you could walk away with. The whole purpose of this channel is just to kind of share different lessons that I've learned as a young entrepreneur within this crazy world. And if you like this, you want to hear more content, please hit the subscribe channel. You can also follow me on socials at It's Alex Duda. Greatly appreciate it, guys, and I will see you guys next week. And actually, in the comments below, I would love to hear if any one of these 5 resonate with you and kind of what your thoughts are on any of these mindset shifts. And if you have any questions for me, please comment below, comment on socials, DM me directly. I really want to shine my light back into the world and make as much impact as I can.